Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are so excited that you are here joining us for some real conversations about building workplaces that actually work for everyone. And today is extra special, y'all. We're talking about autism in the workplace with none other than Dr. Temple Grandin, a living legend, y'all, a true icon. Dr. Temple Grandin is a best-selling author, a globally recognized advocate for autism, a distinguished professor, and quite literally, y'all, one of the most influential thinkers of our time. She's defined how we understand neurodiversity and inspired millions with her stories and so much more. And so, y'all, there's even an Emmy winning HBO film about her life. Yes, from the Time Magazine 100 list to over 30 honorary degrees, Dr. Grandin continues to lead the way in showing us what's possible when we build a world that works for all kinds of minds. Dr. Grandin, thank you so much for being here. Welcome. We're so excited you're here.
Great to be here.
Yes. And so, as we dive straight into this conversation, I know that you were diagnosed with autism at a time when it wasn't really understood. And honestly, even today, I feel like a lot of people aren't quite sure how to define autism, how to identify what autism is in, I guess, the neurodiversity spectrum. So when someone asks you what exactly is autism, how do you usually explain it?
Well, it's a neurological difference that varies from Einstein. He had no speech till age 3, to somebody that might be very severely challenged and cannot dress themselves, cannot do basic life skills. It's a very broad spectrum. I think at the more fully verbal end of the spectrum, at the mildest forms, it's just a personality variant. At what point do geeks and nerds should get the autism label? The other big issue today is autism's increased a whole lot. And I think what's happened is a lot of this has to do with we don't teach social skills in the same structured way that we used to teach them. When I was 9 years old, and all the kids in my neighborhood had to dress up when the parents had a party, and you had to be host and hostesses. We did things like selling candy for charity. We were taught to say please and thank you. The other thing I think has contributed to the problem is all the screen time. I think that has also contributed to the problem. So that a kid that might be just slightly geeky, it's a bit more geeky, and then gets the autism label. Now, the other thing that's happened over the years is the diagnostic criteria have changed. In the 80s, for a child to be labeled autistic, there had to be speech delay, which I definitely had. Hey, I want to see you. I don't like to talk to myself. Put it back so I can see you.
Sorry about that. It's because you're giving so much great information that in my mind I was like, nobody needs
to leave it. Just leave it. I want to talk to you. I don't like talking to myself on the computer.
Perfect.
But in the 80s, you had to have speech delay to be autistic. Now, I definitely had speech delay. When I was 3 years old, I looked very severe. No speech, screaming, rocking, all typical autistic behaviors. And I was very lucky to get into a very good early intervention program. I can't emphasize how important that is. Then in the 90s, that's when the Asperger label came, where it's basically socially awkward, no speech delay. And then in 2013, they merged everything all together. And so you've got this gigantic spectrum now. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of the increase now is not in the kids with delayed speech. They've always been here. I think it's more in the kid that gets diagnosed at 8 years old, or 7 or 8 years old, no friends, and the screen time has just made it worse. And the fact that we don't teach social rules. In my generation, we had sit-down meals. There's also a very interesting book by Bill Gates called Source Code. Mm-hmm. And he was brought up the same way I was. It's now official. He's autistic. He had to do the party host. He had to sell stuff for charity. His mother put him in all kinds of kid events like Cub Scouts so that he'd learn how to socialize. You sat at the family table. You learned to take turns talking. These things are not taught the same way. And I think this has contributed to You see, before the autism label got invented by Tanner, uh, kids like me were just labeled brain damaged, retarded, mentally retarded. That's what people, because kids that have speech delay have always been here. They've just got different labels.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't emphasize enough that if you have a 3-year-old that's not talking, you want to check for deafness, and you've got to get them into an educational program. And one of the problems we got right now is I travel around, I'm finding 3-year-olds on 2-year wait lists. Absolutely unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what we need to be doing is recruit retired teachers and get them to work with these little kids just playing games. That was a big part of my therapy, was learning how to take turns at games, how to wait and take turns. Oh, Bill Gates had lots of board games, lots of card games. I had the same thing. I was just reading some more of that book today. But that teaches a really important skill.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that.
And I love how you're bringing it back to the idea of, different kinds of minds, but also early intervention in identifying how the different
Well,
kinds.
the problem is these 3-year-olds that are not talking, they're
Mhm.
just identified.
Yeah.
They're just not getting the official diagnosis for the insurance companies to pay for therapy. So we got to do something. I'm
Mhm.
seeing this in quite a lot of places. We got to start church play or library play
Yeah.
and get retired teachers start working with these kids just on little turn-taking games. Because the worst thing you can do is to do nothing with them. That's the worst. Sorry about the sneezing. I've got allergies. But that is the absolute worst. And let them zone out on screens all day?
Yeah.
That's the worst.
It is. It is the worst. And even for, I guess you could say, your neurotypical kids, that's harmful as well, right? It's not helpful for them
I
to.
think it hurts an autistic kid a lot more
Yeah.
because when I forgot to say please, mother would cue me. Another big problem I'm seeing fully verbal autistic teenagers doing well in school, no
Mhm.
life skills, then they don't know how to go in a store and buy something and talk to store staff, order food in a restaurant, just do basic things that I was doing when I was 10 years old.
And actually, that brings me to my next question. You've been doing this work for decades now, right? You've written the books, you've given the talks, they've even made a movie about you. And I feel like you've actually shaped how so many people understand autism. Do you still get surprised when people are just starting to learn what you've known all along? Because I feel that just recently have there been started to be like awareness of autism and actually a celebration of autistic talent in our workplaces.
Well, you wouldn't even have this StreamYard we're on right now, or your computer, or any of this stuff without the autistic brain. In fact, I have a book called The Autistic Brain.
Yeah.
And in this book, I talk about different kinds of thinking. I have a whole bunch of jobs in here for different kinds of thinkers, because fully verbal autistics kind of come in 3 types of thinking. Object visualizer like me cannot do algebra. Us object visualizers, we're good at things like skilled trades, building things, fixing machinery, animals, photography, art. And I'm very concerned that we're getting screened out of our educational system. I wrote about this in my book, Visual Thinking.
Mhm.
And we need these skills. I travel around and nobody's fixing the elevators. Been on some very questionable elevators really recently. Then you got the autistic as a mathematician, the visual spatial pattern thinker. That's going to be your computer person. That's going to be your Bill Gates, because he and I had access to the exact same computer terminal. In fact, the book had pictures of it in it. And he took off on it, and I had to drop the programming course. That was an example right there of different kinds of minds. And this brings up the important thing of exposing kids to lots of different things. I was exposed to musical instruments. I was terrible at it. Another kid's going to take off on it. But
Mhm.
art was my thing, art and building things.
Yeah.
That's what I did when I was little. And then you have another type of autistic that's a word fact thinker. They'll know every fact about their favorite sport or movies. And they are often really good at jobs I call quiet specialized retail, where you work with one customer at a time and you find the right car for them, the right business insurance, the right printer because they have detailed knowledge, the merchandise. Don't sell them the most expensive thing. Sell them the right thing.
I
So
love
those are
that.
3 kinds of autistic minds.
Yes. You know,
They're
it sounds
very
like
different because with one of the differences between an autistic person and a regular person is you might be an extreme object visualizer or you're an extreme mathematician, where most people are mixtures of the different kinds of thinking.
right. And like, you know, from what I'm hearing you say, autistic people have different types of thinking. And I like how you have books tied to the different types of thinking. So there's the visual, the pattern, the verbal, right? There's different types.
In this book, I've got all of scientific references.
All of them in there. And like, I feel like we all excel in different ways when we're matched to the right kind of tasks or activities that match the thing that we're good at, right? And
Well,
so,
the thing is, there's people that can't do out. They're absolutely hopeless at algebra.
yeah,
They're worried about that screening us out. That have big construction companies.
right.
And I talked to a veteran just the other day
Mhm.
that failed algebra in college,
Mhm.
and she aced the mechanical aptitude test that the Army gives. And the Army said, "You're fixing airplanes. Your choice is fixing airplanes or fixing airplanes." The Army totally values the mechanical aptitude,
Yeah.
which is something our educational system is not valuing. We're doing verbal and we're doing mathematical, but we're
Yeah.
not doing anything with the with the mechanical aptitude.
Let's bring it to the workplace. So I'm just thinking through that human resources manager, that leader, that CEO. You know, I think from what I'm hearing you say, the problem isn't autism or autistic talent. The problem is the rigid systems and the poor management that we have in our workplaces.
Well, one of the things I learned, I started out freelance, doing my cattle handling designing. Show you one of my drawings right here.
Yes.
And the way I sold jobs is I showed off my drawings.
And isn't that, I think
I
that's
did not show them to human resources.
Oh, yeah.
That's not where I showed them. I showed them to the owner of the ranch, the owner of the feed yard, the plant manager of a beef plant. Showed them to the higher ups that would appreciate. Show them to the people who would appreciate them and the people that would be actually using the equipment.
Isn't that what your HBO film is about? The one that is named after you, Temple Grandin?
Well, there was a movie that came out named Temple Grandin, and it shows how I think visually. That's shown very accurately in the movie, and they recreated my projects, which makes me really happy.
I loved, absolutely enjoying just hearing more about how you went from, an opportunity to have an idea and actually visualizing the experience, right, of cattle, of animals, right, as they're going through the situations they were in. So it kind of made me think about strengths, superpowers, and I was just thinking through a question about just thinking through if you were to think about some of your superpowers as an autistically talented person who is clearly thriving in our workplaces today. Tell me a little bit about what you think your superpowers are.
Well, I'm an extreme object visualizer. And some of the first research I ever did with cattle is I got in the chutes to see what cattle were seeing. And I noticed that things like shadows would make them stop moving, a puddle, a reflection, a coat on a fence, things like this would make the cattle refuse to move. And most people didn't notice that. At the time I did this, I did not know that a lot of other people thought more verbally. And they couldn't see why I would get in the chute. But if you're an object visualizer, it makes total sense to get in the chute, see what the cattle were actually seeing. And that was some of the very first research I ever did. That was back in the 70s, the early 70s. That's when I did it. I can remember doing it too.
Yeah.
My memory is like a whole lot of little phone pictures.
So that's what I was gonna say. So you don't see, like when I see something, I'm thinking through like, how am I gonna explain it verbally? You're seeing with pictures, with images. Is that how you visualize?
Yeah, and it's like I don't remember everything. It's more like my brain's like a mobile phone, a smartphone that takes pictures. And things that interest me, I like take a picture of that. They're like little tiny snapshots and videos that move just a little bit.
And so then you, whenever you get a prompt of something you need to consider, you bring all those images.
Well, then I can sort through the images.
Mm.
And then my thinking tends to be very associative.
Can you explain what associative means?
Well, associative thinking is where I used to talk about human relations were like a glass sliding door. If you run up to it too fast, it's going to bust. You have to approach things more carefully. And I don't use those kind of imagery now, because the more information I get into my picture memory, then I just use other examples of things.
Yeah.
That, well, when I called somebody a stupid idiot, that definitely did not go over very well. So didn't do that again.
Mm-hmm.
But it's associative, not. And if I ask you, someone says to me, I can tell you how my thinking works. Ask me to think about something, like kind of pretend I'm Google for images, and not something like house or dog. Let's get a little more creative than that.
Yeah, whenever you were just talking, I was just thinking about it's about perspective, right? Like, I think sometimes maybe in our workplaces, there's not the understanding, and this is kind of like what you're reminding us of, that the perspective of what one person sees as, that person doesn't have talent because they can't think in this way or operate in this way.
You see, a visual thinker will see something that might be a risk.
Mm-hmm.
See something that might be a solution to a problem. The mathematician tends to calculate something that will be a risk. And in this book, Visual Thinking, I use the example of the Fukushima nuclear power plant.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't design a nuclear reactor. That's the job for the mathematicians. But maybe I need to work on the safety systems. Because when I discovered why Fukushima burned up, I'm going, how could you not see it? Simple waterproof doors would have prevented the electrical emergency cooling pump from drowning.
Wow.
And if they'd had those, it would not have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Old-fashioned technology, they did not have them.
And this is the emphasis on why we need all the different types of minds and ways.
They can work together in a complementary manner. What I found when I worked on the beef processing plants, I worked with people that owned shops, definitely were autistic, that took high school welding, and they had big shops. And they designed and built all of the mechanical things in the plant.
Mm-hmm.
But then the degreed engineer with the engineering degree, they did the refrigeration. That requires a lot more math. My kind of thinker wouldn't go near refrigeration, wouldn't understand it.
Yeah.
But this is an example of, you need to have both kinds of thinkers.
And I think sometimes that's a challenge, because we just had a session recently where we had some audience members sharing about their experiences. They were artistic, and their experiences, like, for example, in an interview. And what was shared is that sometimes in interviews, when the people are getting hired, there's the misunderstanding of social skills.
I want to get rid of interviews.
Yeah.
Let's work on the back door into jobs.
Okay, so
half of all good jobs are back door. Basically, what that is somebody gets you into the job. Mm-hmm. Now, I was very good at seeing back doors. There's a scene in the HBO movie where the editor of the Farmer Ranchman magazine, our state farm magazine, was at a cattle event. And I went up to him and I got his card and I said, write an article. Well, we're selling candy for charity. Maybe not bashful about asking for the card. I produced an article. Then I said, hey, Mail, maybe I can write a column. And I pitched that to him. Mm-hmm. 6 months later, I was livestock editor.
Yeah.
That's an example of a back door. They're everywhere, and people just don't see them. And the other thing, when I started designing cattle handling facilities, I showed off my drawings. Mm-hmm. And the biggest problem I had when I started out in the 70s in the cattle industry was being a woman. Autism was a total non-issue. Yeah. It was being a woman. Mm-hmm. But there were women in journalism. See, that was easier to get into. Yes. But I very quickly developed a reputation. And when I covered a cattle feeders meeting, I summarized those talks accurately. Yeah. And I got respect for that.
Wow. So there's even that intersectionality of the different things you've had to deal with, not only your autism, but also your gender, and considering the fact of maybe the time, right? The
Well,
day
at
and
the time, this is
overall.
early, this is 70s. This is
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah.
But I also made myself very good at what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I started designing facilities, I wrote about them,
Yeah.
pictures of them. And I was a good photographer. Object visualizers are decent photographers.
Yeah.
I took good pictures of my facilities. I
Mhm.
also took good pictures to show, well, here's an example of a shadow that'll make the cattle stop, a coat on a fence, a reflection. The sun is shining in their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
I'd take pictures of these things. So when I first started talking about cattle handling, I had some really nice slides. So that helped make up for being awkward in how I talked.
Mm-hmm. So you're showing your work.
I showed my work. What
Mm-hmm.
I learned to do, sell my work, not myself,
Yes.
and make your work really good.
And not just talking, right? So showing and kind of like making people get like, you may be early in your career, but there's so much potential. So maybe
Well, I've
having a
worked with a lot of
portfolio,
people that owned metal shops that were autistic.
maybe.
I've been out to the tech companies. I mean, half those programmers are on the spectrum. We wouldn't have any computers
Yeah,
without autism. It's that simple.
yeah. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about how your visual thinking, you've been mentioning about innovating in the animal space, right? So you've redesigned um, the way cattle is handled, right? I
Yeah.
will now ask you to sort of like think about workplaces today, like your typical corporate work environment where people, maybe they're working remotely, right? So maybe they're not going into an office, or maybe they're going into an office, right? So just think about if you were to visually redesign corporate jobs today, what would you change first?
Well, I want to get rid of the LED lights that flicker. Let's just get in some very, very specific things. Pull out your phone and photograph that room in slow motion video. And I'd recommend an iPhone because I know that has the right shutter speed.
Okay.
Regular slow motion video. All right, let's look at some other things. I'm finding certain things come up all the time. I can't remember long strings of verbal instruction. So somebody goes blah, 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 do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. I can't remember the order.
Yeah.
Let's teach the autistic employee to make a pilot's checklist where you write it down. You write down the things that you're going to do.
And it can be a collaboration between the employee and their leader, right? Like
Yeah.
it shouldn't
Now, what I've seen,
be the employee to
I've
do
seen a lot of situations where an autistic person has been in a job very successfully, sometimes for many years,
it.
and when the boss changes.
Oh,
That's very dangerous time. In fact, I almost lost my job at the Farmer Ranchman when the magazine got sold, and we got a new boss, and he thought it was really weird. And Susie, who did the graphic design, who I'm pretty sure was autistic when I look back at it, she said, we got to get together a big scrapbook of all of your articles to show Jim. And then he gave me a raise.
right. Again, showing the work.
Showing the work. I learned to sell my work and not myself. Also, the things I did were like you write a certain amount of articles. There were certain meetings that I had to cover, and livestock shows I had to cover. And then there were other things that I could, features I could do in, my own discretion.
Yeah.
But you have certain well-defined work to get done. And then when I design things like the dipping vat projects shown in the movies, it's very well defined what that has to do. It's not vague.
Yeah. I love it.
And
So,
the same thing with the programming.
yeah.
I'd say, well, develop a program that does some specific thing. It's not vague. Vagueness doesn't work.
So letting people show their work, samples instead of resumes, maybe also a tip, right? For interview.
Well, I want to forget. I want to really push the back door.
Yeah.
Because everything I did was back door. But my candy selling experience and my party hostess experience, very important.
Yeah.
Because I used to go to conventions and I'd go card hunting. That's what I used to call it.
Okay.
And I would go up to people and talk to them and show them my portfolio.
Yes.
That's how I got jobs.
Yes.
And half of all good jobs are backdoor. Now, sometimes you can, apply those things online and it will work. But You know, the interview for me when I did do it was lay out the drawings.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I need to be showing those drawings to the cattle buying department, not the human resources department.
And I really like how for me, you're visually painting a picture of a path that a person who is autistic could travel as they're looking for a space in the workplace. And that involves having a community of people around them, but also keeping track of their work, accomplishments, building a portfolio, and then being ready to present that portfolio in whatever format when needed.
Well, a lot of the successful autistic people have their own businesses. See these metalworking shops?
Yeah.
Those people owned those businesses.
Yeah.
They usually, it was a married couple. The wife then ran the business part, like, invoicing, paying payroll, ordering stuff, all the things you have to do, keep a business going.
Yeah.
See, again, that's different kinds of minds working in a cooperative manner. I make great point to business people that we need these different kinds of minds. We've got a real problem now with mechanical stuff that we don't make. Now, I'm talking about expensive equipment for a pork processing plant or a chicken processing plant coming out of Holland, high-wage country. Well, we're paying the price now for taking the shop classes out of the schools, paying the price big time, because to import all that equipment over here in 100 shipping containers, that gets very expensive. And the problem is we're not developing the neurodiverse autistic individuals that we had 20 years ago to build the equipment. You know, sometimes an engineer will go, oh, well, they just build equipment. No, these people invent equipment.
Yeah.
And they may only have a high school education, but it's all mechanical skill, not mathematical skill. It's a different kind of skill.
So like maybe we can bring back more of the hands-on experiences, apprenticeships, right?
Well, but the thing is, we need to be bringing these on with young kids. You know, they are being brought on the community colleges. We have an excellent program here at Front Range Community College, just excellent. But for a lot of kids, that's too late. We need to show them when I took shop in 5th grade. I was doing sewing in 4th grade with a toy sewing machine that actually sewed.
Yeah.
You know, real hands-on kind of stuff. And I've had students in my class that never used a ruler. That's last year.
Wow.
They haven't done any hands-on things. And I think that's really bad.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why certain specialized mechanical equipment we got to buy from Holland, even the state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine, the one we don't want China to get, it's from Holland, even though it's based on our mathematical research. Well, it goes back to the shop classes.
The production.
Lots of mechanical gadgets on that thing.
Yes. So it kind of brings me to what we're doing this month, which is celebrating Autism Awareness Month. And I know that you've always said that awareness is not enough, that we have to have action. So when I'm thinking about everything that you're mentioning, I'm just trying to envision a world where
I don't see, that's very top down. You see, you're thinking very top down, big concept.
Yes, tell me what we need to do.
I think specific examples. Like, I probably have talked to 20 people where the pilot's checklist would save their job.
Okay.
Probably, 10 or 15 people were changing the boss, lost their job. See, my mind tends to think in specific examples.
Yes.
And then put them in categories.
Yes.
And now that I've been around for, 50 years in the cattle industry, I start to get specific examples. And certain things like the checklist and changing bosses, that's come up over and over and over again. And the other thing with the buildings is the lighting, because some people also get migraines from flickering LED lights. It's just terrible.
So some of it is also about education. So while we're saying that awareness is just the first step, the action may be exposure to autistic individuals. What do you think about that?
Well, we need to be developing their strengths. So what we need to do. My ability in art was always encouraged. I had tools growing up.
Okay.
That's an example of developing strengths. I'm also seeing problems where we're not developing strengths in our math kids, and they turn into gigantic behavior problems because they're bored stiff doing baby math. You might have a fourth grader that needs an algebra book.
Mhm.
Get the one out of the attic, the old-fashioned algebra book. That's going to
Yeah.
be the best algebra book for a kid that's a math kid. And we're not developing the strengths, and they can be really bad when they get in trouble.
Mhm.
We need those minds. And I'll
Mhm.
tell you right now, China develops their math kids. I look at copies I get in science magazines, Nature and Science.
Mhm.
There's an article in there on quantum computing. I can't say I read an article on quantum computing, but I looked at it, and I'm
Yeah.
very good at looking at author lists.
Yeah.
They're often from China. They're developing their math kids.
Yeah. I really enjoying talking to you because I feel like you're kind of fitting in for me a picture of a place where all minds are celebrated, right? So I'm thinking of a quiet, maybe flexible work environment with options for lighting, right? Clear communication, checklists, right? Project-based tasks versus vague,
Well, yeah, you see,
right?
where it's something where I design this project, it has
Mhm.
to do a certain thing. And since I was doing freelance, then after we got the equipment started up, then I go on to the next project.
Yes.
But they're things that are well defined.
Yeah.
What does not work, you don't want to just go to autistic programmer and just say, well, develop new software.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be better off to say, well, I want some software that does some specific thing.
Yeah.
And then their job is to design it.
All right. So as we are getting ready to wrap for our session today, spending time with you, Dr. Grandin, it has been amazing talking to you. I want to hear from you. What's next? I saw you showed us all the books that you've written and a lot of opportunities that are presented to you in the world. What's going on in your world? What's next?
Well, I'm 77 years old now. I've been in the cattle industry 50 years. I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University for 35 years. And I'm no longer doing much designing anymore, but I'm doing a lot of talks because we need these different kinds of minds. And I want to help these kids that think differently to be really successful. And so I'm doing a lot of talks discussing things I'm discussing right now.
Yeah.
And I talk to business people and I tell them the first thing they need to understand is that different thinking exists. When I did my original cattle experiments, getting in the chutes, I thought everybody thought in pictures. I was in my late 30s when I finally figured out that maybe not everybody thought in pictures.
Yeah.
You see, you have to first realize different kinds of thinking exist, and then let's look at what they're best suited for. And we need the different minds. If there'd been a visual thinker on the Fukushima project, it would have had waterproof doors and it would have never happened.
Yeah. That is so true. Wow. Okay, Dr. Grandin, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for
I just want to give a few little hints
it's
on autistic kids' working skills.
okay.
Let's start out with the kids in the pipeline now, chores for young kids.
Yes.
And then I have grandparents come up to me all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And those grandparents all have good jobs and they discover they're autistic. Kids get diagnosed, but they had paper routes at 11. So we have to find substitutes for paper routes. Walking the next door neighbor's dog. They got to learn how to do a job for somebody that's outside the family. That is really important. A church volunteer job. Instant of legal age, when they're still in high school, they need to get jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So they've learned how to work before they graduate from high school.
Yeah.
I'm seeing too much where I've seen them graduate in college, magna cum laude, and fail in the workplace
Yes.
because they never learned work skills.
Yeah.
Now, it's never too late to start. Let's say you've got an adult video game addict.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you one way to get them off. Introduce car mechanics very slowly. They'll discover motors are more interesting.
Yeah.
This is where we can tap into a retired auto mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Teach some of these kids how to fix cars.
Skills.
It's
Mm-hmm.
another place we can tap into the retired community. It's going to be a lot more fun for them than golf and cruises.
Sounds like your next book could be a playbook for autistic talent in the workplace.
Well, this book right here covers a whole lot. Visual thinking covers a whole lot of stuff on why we need autistic talent in the workplace.
Okay.
We wouldn't have computers if we didn't have the mathematical autistic talent. And my kind of thinking is more the mechanical talent. And we have a huge need for people to fix things. That's why for my kind of thinker, I'm really pushing really high-end skilled trades. not laying floor tiles. I'm talking about high-end skilled trades.
Yes.
And these jobs are not going to get replaced by artificial intelligence. Elevators are going to be mechanical for a long, long, long time.
Yeah. There's work to be done. I guess we could say that. And
But I
there's
tend to think of
for all minds.
specific things, and we need the skills. It's that simple.
Yes.
And then, of course, you get this big spectrum. Then you have individuals much more severely impacted. They need 24/7 care,
Yeah.
and they're not going to be fixing elevators.
Yeah.
This is one of the problems you get with autism. You're going from Einstein and Bill Gates
Yes.
to somebody that can't dress themselves and do the most simple things.
Yes.
But some of your nonverbals can learn to type, and they actually have a good brain locked inside a dysfunctional body.
Yeah.
It needs to be encouraged. Teaching, typing. Also, just yesterday, I was talking to a man who worked with some people who had cerebral palsy, and they got so sick and tired of being talked to like their children. And one of the guys, that even though he was physically completely disabled, somebody introduced him to stock investing, and he got very, very good at it and makes a living doing it. Yeah, that was something where, Stephen Hawking got very disabled.
Yes.
And he told the New York Times right before he died, concentrate on the things your disability doesn't have any effect on. It doesn't prevent you from doing well. He could do math in his head super well. So that's what he concentrated on. You got to find something that the person can do.
Yes. I think you're saying that, like, advocate for finding people's strengths.
But this cerebral palsy guy one day responded with a swear word. Somebody went up to him and talked to him in kind of baby talk, and he used a swear word. And this is a guy that was making a very good living on the stock market.
Yeah.
Somebody had to introduce that to him.
Yes. Yeah.
Again, you see, this is where I find with developing a lot of strengths, it starts with exposure and then mentoring.
Yes.
Michelangelo was probably autistic. He grew up with stone cutting tools. He was exposed to great art. Then he started making things, and then he was apprenticed into a studio.
Yeah.
Exposure, then mentoring.
I love hearing that. Exposure and mentoring. Dr. Grandin.
You have to expose. I was exposed to a little flute. I couldn't figure out how to play it.
Yes.
So I was going to take off with that flute.
Yes. Well, Dr. Grandin, we are all out of time for our session today. I want to thank you so much for being here with us, for not only sharing your voice, but also your brilliance. And I feel like, even though this month is all about autism awareness, it's very important for us to consider this not just as a celebration moment, right, of recognizing this month that we're in, but also identifying for ourselves what's possible, right, if we are open to hearing from different perspectives. Thank you so much, Dr. Brandt.
Great to talk to you, and I'm going to leave the studio, and thank you for having me.
Yes, you're so welcome. For those of you all who have tuned in, for those of you all who are listening, thank you so much for being here. This is your call to action. Whether you are leading people, or whether you are hiring talent, or whether you are showing up to work every day and you're considering somebody in your organization who may be autistic, you have the power to make your workplace literally feel as one, like make people feel like they belong. That's so important. And so until next time, I hope you keep optimizing your workplace culture. Bye.